All right, let's dive right into this explainer and experience the absolute chilling reality of the Spanish Inquisition. But we're doing it a little differently today. We aren't just going to look at it from the outside looking in. Instead, we're doing something way more immersive. We are literally stepping directly into the shoes of the people who ran it. It brings up a pretty profound question, doesn't it? How does an ordinary person become an instrument of terror? Today, we're going to trace your personal ascent, going all the way from a low-level paper pusher to the ultimate authority. We'll be watching how power, fear, and honestly, just meticulous bureaucracy can slowly corrupt your original intentions. You'll really get to experience that emotional transformation and the creeping moral conflict as you rise up through the ranks. So, setting the stage here, 1478, the machine awakens. Unlike the older medieval papal courts run by the Pope, this brand new Inquisition established by Ferdinand and Isabella is a highly organized royal machine. And the crazy part? It was designed to control society not just through sheer violence, but through the relentless, crushing weight of paperwork. It's a massive instrument of royal policy. And well, you are about to become a very important cog in this machine.
Part 1. The Registrar of Secrets.
Picture this. Your career begins at age 24, stuck in the narrow, bone-dry archives of Seville. The air smells like wax and old parchment. As a registrar, your daily grind is literally just indexing names, cross-checking the private confessions of your own neighbors, and keeping the ledgers straight. It's an overwhelming responsibility, just sorting through totally ordinary disputes and petty suspicions. But you quickly learn something terrifying. Terror here? It isn't some chaotic mob with pitchforks. No, it's a slow, super methodical process. You see cases develop step by step. First, just a rumor, then a private conversation, a witness, a summons, and finally, the formal procedure. This endless paperwork prevents rash action, sure, but it also means a simple tavern rumor can eventually, methodically suffocate an entire family. And as you're sitting there indexing the confiscated wealth of the accused, you realize something deeply unsettling right off the bat. The sheer operating cost of this whole institution, paying your salary, maintaining the buildings, the guards, it turns the policing of heresy into a highly profitable enterprise. The accused are literally, and I mean literally, funding their own destruction through the sequestration of their goods. It's wild. Moving on to part 2, familiar eyes in the streets. Okay, so by the time you turn 35, you finally get a promotion. You step out of the dim candlelight of the archives and into the bright, bustling streets of the city. You're no longer just carrying papers around. You are carrying authority. You are now what they call a familiar. You wear this badge that literally brings dead silence to any tavern you walk into. You act as the eyes and ears of the tribunal, walking right among ordinary tradesmen. You take note of changing faces in the Jewish quarter. You escort the accused to the city safely, and you just kind of hover nearby when tensions rise. People instantly lower their voices when you arrive because, well, they know exactly what you represent. But there's this really dark duality to your new role. On one hand, supposedly, you're the great defender of orthodoxy. But on the other hand, you and your fellow familiars enjoy total immunity from secular law, plus some heavy tax exemptions. The historical sources actually reveal that a lot of familiars use this diplomatic immunity to commit crimes, or even extort their wealthy neighbors without any fear at all of the secular courts. The system is just breeding corruption, and you're standing right in the middle of it. Section 3. Warden of the Secret Cells. So, your unquestioning loyalty eventually earns you yet another promotion, but this one takes you down into the deafening silence of the secret prisons where the accused wait indefinitely. You are now the warden, and you oversee a genuinely terrifying timeline. Prisoners are held in absolute total secrecy, and meanwhile, outside, their own sequestered property is being slowly sold off by the quartermaster, the dispensero, just to pay for their daily bread and water. You basically watch as an entire family's wealth is totally depleted just to keep a suspect alive in a cell. And this is long before a trial even officially concludes. The sheer banality of your daily evil is kind of shocking. Your job is basically to strictly enforce this horrific environment. You enforce complete silence. You forbid any outside contact. You actually find yourself ignoring desperate, totally human pleas for something as simple as a fresh straw mattress. The entire goal here is to enforce a crushing psychological isolation, totally designed to break their resolve. And you probably just tell yourself you're following the manual. You're just doing your job, right? Part 4. Inquisitor, Judge in the Shadows. Fast forward a bit. By age 52, your decades of service finally bring you into the light of the hearing room. You've made it. You ascend to the rank of Inquisitor. You now wield absolute, almost godlike power over the lives, fates, and dignities of the totally broken people brought before you. But you aren't acting alone. You sit right at the top of this finely tuned bureaucracy. You rely on theologians to assess the gravity of the heresy, a prosecutor to build the case, and a constable to literally drag the suspects into your courtroom. You don't speak to humiliate. You speak to clarify. You are the absolute master of this grim ceremony. But here's what's truly staggering about this. It's how far your jurisdiction extends. 40 years. You can literally prosecute the memory of dead heretics for crimes committed 40 years ago. I mean, just imagine ordering the exhumation of someone's bones, putting those bones on trial, and then confiscating the inheritances of their currently living grandchildren. It's a completely risk-free way to seize property. And, as an inquisitor, you are the one authorizing it. Sitting in that judge's chair, you're constantly facing this massive moral conflict. You look down at the trembling witness before you, knowing for a fact they've been isolated for months, and you're forced to decide, are they actually a genuine threat to the church, or are they just a terrified victim of the exact same machine you've spent your whole life building? Does their stuttering mean they're hiding some deep heresy, or are they just terrified you're going to take their house? Section 5. The auto de fe. So all your private judgments in those quiet little hearing rooms, they eventually culminate in an overwhelming, massive public spectacle, the auto de fe, or active faith. You get to sit up there on the elevated benches of honor, watching as tens of thousands of citizens gather in the blinding sunlight. Down below you are the condemned. They're draped in the San Benito, those infamous yellow linen garments painted with the big red crosses. And you read the verdicts out loud to the crowd. It is a massive theatrical display of your power, supposedly showing the victory of orthodoxy over heresy. Now, while executions, being relaxed to the secular arm for burning at the stake, well, that definitely captures the public imagination. You know the real truth. Your true everyday power actually lies elsewhere. It lies in financially ruining families through mass confiscations and sending the condemned to a slow, agonizing death rowing in the king's galleys. And as you survey all this incredible wealth just pouring into your tribunal, you might remember an old letter from the archives. Even Pope Sixtus IV openly protested way back in 1482 that this entire grand spectacle in Spain was frequently driven by pure, unchecked greed. He literally condemned the practice of ruining faithful Christians just to seize their estates. And sitting up there, looking at the gold, deep down, the Pope probably wasn't entirely wrong. Which brings us to part 6, the Grand Inquisitor's burden. Finally, near the very end of your life, you reach the absolute apex of the hierarchy. You inherit the insanely isolating burden first carried by Tomás de Torquemada himself. You are now the Grand Inquisitor. From your office, you direct the Suprema, the Supreme Council. You issue universal instructions that govern every single local tribunal. You manage this massive, self-funding empire of surveillance and judgment that has fundamentally forever altered the economy and the psychology of Spain. And the best part? You answer to absolutely no one except the monarch. Standing at the very top, looking back down the ladder at your entire life, you realize something profound. This whole avalanche of human suffering you now control, all the fortunes seized, the lives completely ruined, it all still begins exactly the same way it did when you were a 24-year-old archivist. First a rumor, then a warning, then a summons. A single, quiet whisper in the dark. You've climbed every single rung of this massive bureaucracy. You've enforced the rules, seized the wealth, and worn the robes of ultimate authority. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final haunting thought. If you build a machine that turns fear into law, how long before you become its prisoner? When a bureaucracy is explicitly designed to relentlessly police the human soul, who is actually truly free? Thanks for joining me today, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.